Okay, good afternoon, everybody. No, there was an emergency meeting going on. No, on the end of our, on the part of our resource person. So she will be joining very shortly, within 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, please bear with us. Okay, thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, already joined. No, our honorable resource persons already joined. I think principals are also joined here.
Uh, can everybody hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, madam. Yes,
Good
okay.
afternoon, everybody. With due respect to the principal, to the college authorities, and
Okay,
the professor, I will wait for 5 minutes, and then, or as you tell me, and then I will begin the lecture.
okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. So, without wasting any time, I will be directly going ahead to our Dr. Pankaj Kumar Debnath, because sir told me that he has got so much important meeting going on right now on university level. That's why. No, so very warm and graceful good afternoon, everybody, and. So we are here. This already on we are at the end of our lecture series that is going on. Since this lecture series has been designed as a part of the ongoing lecture series that is going on everywhere, in every each and every department of our college. So this lecture is especially designed for MA second semester student of our college in particular, and all the students are in general. So, and this lecture has been a kind of brainchild of our beloved and honorable principal, Dr. Pankaj Kumar Debnath, who is the chairperson of this session. So, I request Dr. Pankaj Kumar Debnath, the principal of our college, to say something about the lecture. Okay, sir.
So, very good.
Pinky madam, please unmute yourself. Pinky madam, please unmute yourself. Yes. I think there is some network issue on the part of our principal, sir. I think there is some network issue on the end of the principal, sir. I think he will be joining very shortly. Okay, please bear with us 1 or 2 minutes.
Hello, Tariqul.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Actually, there was network error, so I was disconnected. So sorry for the interruption.
It's
So,
okay, sir.
yeah. So at the outset, I do convey my sincere thanks and gratitude to today's speaker, Dr. Pinky Isha, the Department of English of Rabindra Bharati University, for our college, especially for the students of Department of PG English. This is really a rare opportunity to hear from you, madam. And though there are so many problems of online teaching and learning methods, but I think that this is really a blessing of this online teaching learning method, that you will be giving your lecture from far away and the students will hear from you from Cooch, Behar. So this is possible as because we are applying this method of online teaching and learning, and this is a part of our initiative taken from the college, that all the departments have been organizing special lectures for their students of different semesters and also webinars. And I think that for the students it will be really be beneficial, not only for your syllabus but also for your future purposes. And I think the students who will be hearing here, should try to interact with madam so that any doubt is there, it is clarified, and if there is any question or you want to clarify certain things, please don't hesitate to interact with madam. Two-way interaction will definitely will be a very good for students also. So from my part, I also thank the coordinator of PG, Department of English, Professor Pallab, Sarker, the H.O.D of our college, Department of English of our college, Mr. Tariqul, and all other faculty members, both PG and UG, for organizing such a wonderful lecture session entirely for the benefit of the students. And I will not take much time. I hope today's lecture will be a very successful one, and all will be benefited from this piece of lecture. So thank you again. Again, I am giving my heartiest thanks to Dr. Pinky Isha, the invitee, the renowned personality in the field of English, for your presence and for your consent to deliver your lecture. Thank you, all of you. Over to Tariqul, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for your encouraging, for an inspiring speech, and I hope that we will go on encouraging and inspiring us like this in near and distant future. Now, on behalf of the English department, and I and our respected colleagues, I do hereby request Dr. Mogno Sarker, the invited faculty, to the PG Department of English, to say something in this platform. Dr. Mogno Kumar Sarker. Dr. Mogno Sarker.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Respected principal, H.O.D sir, and coordinator of our department. Good afternoon, ma'am. This is something that really makes me happy that our college is organizing such lecture series, and finally we are getting to have lecture series in the Department of English as well. We have already had a couple of them for the students of the undergraduate section, and this possibly is the commencement of the lecture series of the. So, welcome
হ্যাঁ
to all
বলো।
my students and the other
হ্যাঁ হয়ে গেছে, এখন একটা
members of the
প্রোগ্রাম লাইভ স্ট্রিম
faculty.
করছি আমি, লেকচার
Well,
চলছে।
I think on a personal note, well, talking about absurdity, putting Pinter in context, uh, well, what better can be a time than a pandemic going on? So, talking about absurdity within the context of a pandemic, uh, you know, has a special significance of its own. Uh, and you know, this is how we start this session. So it holds much for me, I mean, in terms of learning, and again reflecting upon this whole notion of the absurdity of our very existence. Well, uh, the reality that we are accustomed to, the reality of offline classes, going to the college, you know, making ourselves comfortable on the benches, the fan, the air there, the chalk dust, and a whole lot of stuff. That's a accustomed reality suddenly changing itself to uh, laptop screens or mobile screens, earphones, and also taking, you know, we have to keep in mind the network issues which we face on a daily basis, should give much impetus to this very reflection on the notion of the absurd, about the existence of absurdity that we are inhabiting. And this reflection, I believe, uh, uh, you know, warrants much attention during this hour of the pandemic. So I'm looking forward to Professor Isha's lecture on Pinter and the Theatre of Absurd. Uh, I and also, you know, I want all my students to be you know, very attentive during this session. Please keep your ears open. You know, if necessary, take adequate notes on your notepad. Well, thank you. I don't wish to prolong any longer. Over to the H.O.D of the department, sir.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Magno Sarker. Now it's a time to start the lecture. No, the topic is also very much interesting. Harold Pinter and the Theatre of the Absurd. So this the topic has been chosen, no, on behalf of English department, and Dr. Pinky Isha will be enlightening us. So Dr. Pinky Isha is an assistant professor of English at Rabindra Bharati University, Kolkata. She has been teaching for 9 years in her capacity as full-time teacher in different colleges and technical institutes across West Bengal. Her areas of interest include Commonwealth literature, British drama of the 20th century, and performance. Besides that, she has also authored 3 books and has many research papers and articles in national and international journals to her credit. She has also presented papers in different symposiums, international conferences at home as well as abroad. So I hope these lectures will help to enlighten us on the theater of the absurd, and especially this topic is very much important and also relevant. You know, the situation, a kind of absurd situation that is going on, you know, throughout the world. You know, keeping in mind this, you know, COVID-induced lockdown and pandemic. Okay, so I hope this lecture will be highly beneficial for us, given the, you know, varied experiences of teaching in different kind of institutions throughout, you know, West Bengal by Pinky Isha. Dr. Pinky Isha will be enlightening us on this topic, and we hope that this lecture will be very much beneficial for all of us in general and for the second semester students of PG in particular. So thank you, ma'am. Okay, so let's start. Over to Dr. Pinky Isha.
Thank you very much for that beautiful introduction. I once again thank the principal, sir, the HOD, and Professor Islam. Now I would like to begin, but I'm afraid I have very few minutes to complete the vast arena of the theatre of the absurd and Harold Pinter. I will try to be as quick as I can. Because see, when we talk about the theatre of the absurd, we cannot talk about Pinter in isolation. Though it is a very known fact that this as a movement, the theater of the absurd, and that's a very ironical name because if it's theater, it ought to be very fruitful. Now, because absurdity was taken to be the norm in the post Second World War period, you see, this was a time when the movement popped up. I'm using this word popped up because this was not an anticipated movement. There was much that had happened before the theater of the absurd actually started in 1940 and ended by the mid 1960s. Right away from the beginning of the 20th century, there was a break with traditional social, political, moral, mandates and dictates which had sustained people for generations in Western Europe. Even the Western philosophies like Marxism or any other sustaining philosophy, political philosophies, had actually badly failed because they were incompetent to stop the horrors of the war. When we talk about the theater of the absurd, the horrors of the war is something which we, invariably come to. Not because it was the only characteristic. There were antecedent factors like loss of faith, belief in God, the rise of the movement of existentialism. What is the theory of existentialism? I'll just go very briefly into it. Existentialism as a philosophy took up existence not as something ennobling, not as something that we look up to, not as something that we value, or rather something that we, emulate for people who have to, think about life in a different way. Existentialism was a philosophy of life in which the very facts of existence, the basic postulates of existence was questioned. Why are we born? Why do we die? What happens in the interim period between birth and death? And how does a human life contribute to the greater human good? Or is there anything that contributes to what we call a meaningful, a good existence? Now, the theory of existentialism, and if we see Soren Kierkegaard, we will see that he was the first kind of person to talk about existence in terms which are a little different from the theory of the absurd in the way that you see existential philosophy of life has three basic directions. I'm not going very in-depthly into that, but one is existence as it is, coming to or coping up with or accepting existence as it comes to you, as it is thrust upon you, as you move as an individual from childhood to adolescence to maturity and post-maturity, whatever. The other theory of existence is a fruitful kind of an existence. Is existence really, or can it be really fruitful? Does it have any meaning? Does it have a purpose? And from herein, there is the basic strands of existential philosophy that creeps into the theater of the absurd. And we question, like Albert Camus did in his very famous essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. Now, Sisyphus is a mythical character. In 1942, he wrote this essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, in which Sisyphus is being punished by the gods to roll a huge boulder up the hill. And his efforts are always fruitful because he is able to roll up this huge boulder up the hill. And the boulder comes down automatically because the moment it reaches up, there's the force of gravity and the huge boulder comes falling down, and Sisyphus has to do in and day out. Now, the basic question that Albert Camus, relating to this story, this mythical story, tells us is that, you see, Sisyphus isn't tired. Rather, he is happy with his ordeal. And that was a remark that Camus put at the end of Sisyphus's fate, of his, his predicament, that probably Sisyphus was happy doing what he was doing. Now, this is not a very straightforward interpretation from the viewpoint of the fact that, are we happy if we live in a purposeless, meaningless, useless, an aimless universe which does not recognize our efforts, which does not reward our efforts, and most importantly, which does not, differentiate between good and evil, better or worse, or such things as, binaries. I would use the single word binaries. All the binaries are negated. The binaries are smudged out. The dividing line between the binaries, they kind of evaporate. And then how do we come across, how do we value moral principles, religious principles? They all fall flat. So you see, the basic principles of the theater of the absurd was not only the failure, the predicament of human lives, the loss of life and property in the Second and in the First World Wars, the failure of religions to sustain faith in God, in a Godhead who would elevate, who would, listen to men's prayers and would protect them in a harmless way, and the concept that we can fall back, rest assured that there's someone who is watching and providing some kind of a framework where justice would ultimately be delivered. No, in the theater of the absurd, justice isn't supposed to be delivered. All right. Now, with this very basic introduction, I would like to mention two things. As I said, that with the beginning of the 20th century, right away from 1910, you see, there were various other movements. There was this movement of Surrealism. There was this, the movements in art, for example, Expressionism and Impressionism. These were very important factors which, can contribute to the theater of the absurd, because what we were doing, what art was trying to project in the world of painting and sculpture was not external realities. It was trying to concentrate on internal realities, and internal reality is something that is very, very specific to the theater of the absurd. In fact, theater of the absurd plays, they don't have a plot, they don't have a storyline. Most often, not so with Pinter, of course. I'll come to this, why it isn't so with Pinter. But the fact is that most of the theater of the absurd writers like Fernando Arrabal, Samuel Beckett, Harold Pinter, Eugene Ionesco, Jean Genet, and many more, hailing from different countries, different European countries, they were writing in different modes and ways of expression. They were writing plays of the theater of the absurd, but each of them were different. They were radically different from each other. So you cannot compare Beckett with Pinter. You cannot compare Pinter with Arrabal, or, for example, Ionesco with, say, Fernando Arrabal or somebody else. They had their own specificities. Why I mentioned subjective realities was because, you see, most of the plays of the theater of the absurd, irrespective of from who or by who they were written, that is very important. But if we just take up a play and we analyze that, we see that in most of the plays, plot is missing. There isn't a very single straightforward storyline, or if there is at all a storyline, it doesn't progress. They have a circular structure. They begin exactly as they end. Now, why does this happen? Because the theater of the absurd, and I repeat myself, the theater of the absurd progresses through a series of poetic images. It progresses through lyricality. It progresses through a series of reflections which needn't be in the form of a plot. So we're doing away completely with plot and form. I repeat, we're doing away completely with plot and form. And kind of we're replacing plot and form with something as a series of impressions. When we come to Pinter, we'll see this is done in a very subtle way, in a different way. Of course, as I said, that all writers of the theater of the absurd were, different from each other. Okay, this is one very important thing about all writers of the theater of the absurd. And before I proceed any further with Pinter, can I just ask Professor Islam as to how many more minutes do I have before I complete my lecture?
Okay, total 1 hour given, madam. 1 hour you can speak in totality.
So I complete speaking at 3, or do I complete it at 40?
Okay, you can complete at 3. Okay.
Yes, so one was this form and plot being replaced by something called a series of reflections, images, lyricality, lyrical poetry, subjective consciousness. And mind you, there's not a collective consciousness, not at least in the plays. There is a collective consciousness, definitely, in theories about the theater of the absurd, but not in plays, because here we are dealing with subjective consciousness and subjective undertakings by different individuals. Now, there is another very important thing when I said that Surrealism was a big influence on the theater of the absurd. We know that the mainsprings of Surrealism was from the life of the mind. Before psychoanalysis stepped in, that is, before Sigmund Freud had actually given us an idea of how human beings work in their unconscious and conscious or subconscious modes, we were actually not very sure about human action, because it was a very, very flat perception of human action before psychoanalysis stepped into the context. With the advent of psychoanalysis, with the advent of Freud and Jung, and later Alder and Forney and all others who had refined and bifurcated in various other ways to complete the nexus of the mind. When we look at Surrealism, we see that Surrealism has a direct bearing upon psychoanalysis and how the mind functions, how a disturbed psyche can express, and how unconscious individuals, so-called unconscious or subconscious, in a subconscious mode of existence, does have the power to make very powerful revelations. Though it was a movement related to writing, it was also very fluid in the sense that there were Surrealists writers and there were Surrealists painters. We can think of Picasso, we can think of Max Beckmann, German. We can think of Oskar Kokoschka, very famous painters who were trying to explore. If you see, I'm sorry, I would share later on a few drawings with Professor Islam, because he was first approached me, and I would love to, would want him to give them to the students, because then they can have an idea as to how these paintings and this poetry, and Picasso was also writing poems. So there were many artists who were not only painters, they were also writers, who kind of, vacillated between painting, writing in the form of poetry, novel, drawing, and they were revealing this subjective consciousness that had so far and so long been neglected in the history of human civilization until the 20th century stepped in. So this is, trying to get to the bottom of the theater of the absurd. Why do we have such a genre at all, the theater of the absurd? Even if we look at the other theatrical modes, we know that the film in Britain started, and even in the US, the talking film, the talkies started in the 1930s. The talkies started in the 1930s, but actually, even before the talkies started, we had the silent films of Laurel and Hardy. We had the silent films of Charlie Chaplin. And in all those films, there is this note of irony, there is this note of comedy and menace, or comedy and tragedy side by side. So the binaries exist quite close to each other. And remember, these films don't take the help of dialogue. Similarly, why I mentioned this film is because when we think about the theater of the absurd, we also think about expression, the visual expression. And in these films, we see that how just without dialogue also, you can get the breadth, you can get the length and breadth, and you can get the touch and feel of what is happening with the character. It's very important because, as I said, the theater of the absurd is a series of lyrical, subjective images. And so how do these images add up to the final image of the play? I'm not talking about the theme, because when I say the final image, I mean the reflections when they are concretized, when they are, placed on a single platter, so to say. So once again, coming back, we need to look at the philosophies of existentialism. We need to talk about vaudeville. We need to talk about comedy. We need to talk about Dario Fo, who was trying to make people laugh, but were people laughing? When Charlie Chaplin was trying to make people laugh, were they laughing? So what is this, what is this contradiction between laughter from the inside, or is it laughter, the sound of laughter, or is it really laughing or enjoying in the sense of laughter having only one meaning, connoted meaning, that is joy? So the various influences that go to explaining why this movement rose post-war, post-Second World War. And now I'm coming to Pinter. Now, when we talk about Pinter, he was born in the 1930s and he died in 1908. And the best thing about him is that he was born in the interim period between the two world wars. He was born at a time when, as a child, he had to shift his residences very often. Remember, his father was a Jewish tailor, and there was a terrible, even before Second World War, there was a terrible anti-Jewish feeling amongst many people across the Western world. And a couple of families who were Jewish families had to take shelter in most discarded schools, factories. Children and women were evacuated from the central places. And though he was born in the East End of London, which was in that time not a very respectable place where the well-to-do used to live. It was a place for the middle class. So in Pinter, we have that peculiar stance of mediocrity and that peculiar stance of people of high places coalescing into one idiom so far as language is concerned. In some of the places, in Pinter, we see that Pinter is not so much worried about people from different classes. What he's worried about is how people express themselves or do not express themselves. So expression is an important mode of, discussion in Pinter. If we see Pinter's early plays, and Pinter was influenced by Samuel Beckett. Before I even talk about his plays, I think it would be doing injustice if I don't tell about Pinter a little more. Pinter was fully interested in writing poetry, and even he wrote a few novels. And when he first went to Ireland, he had met, he had met the Irish playwright Samuel Beckett, and he had also, by that time, by the 1958, he had been meeting Vivian Merchant, who was supposed to become his wife. And in the first three plays, The Room, The Dumb Waiter, and there was another play, The Homecoming, which, and of course, there were many brilliant plays, The Birthday Party, not The Homecoming. The Homecoming comes a little later. You see, in these three plays, The Dumb Waiter, The Room, and The Birthday Party, Pinter had established his reputation as a theater of the absurd playwright. You see, there is a particular, dichotomy, I would use this word, quote unquote, dichotomy, of Pinter with other theater of the absurd writers, because you see, Pinter's plays are very realistic in their setting. Even the language is very realistic. Even the storyline is very realistic. So we have three things: the storyline, the language, the plot. And remember, I just now told you a little while ago that plot is negated in the theater of the absurd. But Pinter's plays do have a plot. They have a very strong notion of what a plot is. Why is it so? Because Pinter was a realist. He was writing in the realist mode of, writing. And when he was writing in the realist mode of writing, also kind of, using realism to refute it. Mark my words, he was using realism to refute it, because the situations may be realistic, the dialogue may be realistic, but the outcome and the decisions, or what happens actually, even if they are realistic, they leave us wondering that what we have actually seen, whether it has really happened or not. Pinter's plays are also very lyrical. Pinter's plays fall a little different from the genre of the theater of the absurd, because mostly theater of the absurd plays are anti-plays, quote unquote, anti-plays, because they are unlike plays. They are unlike, plays by other writers, and they are also anti-plays because they don't have a very well established, firmly laid plot. In Pinter, language is interrupted with dots, with dashes, with gaps, with blanks. And how do we interpret this blanks, dots, gaps? We interpret them because those dots and gaps and dashes, they don't reveal a vacuum. They're very much there. They are expressions of something that needs to be said, but cannot be said, or would not be said with a definite purpose, and which the audience or the person who is watching the play needs to understand. Now, there's something very interesting about Pinter's plays, and I would just mention it very briefly. That is, in Pinter, as with anybody else, any other writer of the theater of the absurd, there are two ways of perceiving a play or expressing or getting to the bottom of a play. And I think I should have mentioned this earlier, but nevertheless, when students of literature read plays, they're just reading a play. But Pinter is very picturesque. So when we read Pinter's plays, we also feel as if we're looking into this play. Something is going before our eyes. So it's very picturesque feelings, especially if we talk about a play like The Landscape, which is a beautiful description about an outdoor setting of a landscape, a sea, the sound of the sea, and a tree in the middle of a field. It's very, very picturesque. If you see a play like Night and Silence, it's very picturesque because it's a dark room where only three characters are sitting and the light falls on each of their faces in a circle when they speak. Otherwise, the stage is dark. But even when we are reading, you see, students should understand that it's a different feel when we read a play and when we see a play. And that's why we kind of, are laid in a back seat when we only think of a play so far as reading is concerned, because we must also be interested in watching a play, and that's very important. But even without going into it, I come back. I was talking about language in Pinter's plays. I was talking about dots and dashes, and they're very helpful. Another feature of Pinter's plays is that there are some plays which are very talkative plays. For example, we can take a play like The Homecoming. The conventional imagery of a university professor returning home after a long period of absence with his wife to an all-male menage, that is to an all-male household, and facing complete strangers than how he had known them, his own brothers and father, is a very unconventional play, because here Pinter is talking about regressive sexuality. He's talking about people who do not know how to express themselves after being in a period of, sterility, or should we say, after being in a period of total inactivity. So how can people react differently at different times, even to known people, even to their own family members? We have a similar, story of characters coming to light in The Caretaker. There is this caretaker, a tramp, who comes between the two brothers, who takes up a job as a caretaker in the household. And how the two brothers, they, get to know each other in a new light. Not that they get to know the caretaker because the caretaker is already an outsider, but how people come to reveal themselves in situations which they have never known before. And that is the test of a character. Now, the initial plays of Pinter were called the comedies of Menace. This was a term which was specifically applied to Pinter only and not to anybody else, because Pinter's plays were called the comedies of Menace in the sense that there were comic elements. A theater of an absurd play has to have comedy and tragedy coexisting rather side by side. And so Pinter's plays are called comedies of Menace because they are basically, I wouldn't say they are fully comedies, not in the sense that we understand comedies that it would make you laugh, ha 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 ha, throughout the play. No. They're comedies because we are faced with unprecedented and funny situations, unwarranted funny situations. Not funny that they would make you laugh, but certainly they would question the motivation of characters. Sometimes they're also funny. They border on fun. But, a kind of an ironical fun, I would say. Sometimes it's black humor. Now, fun in the theater of the absurd is also with Pinter, is not always fun. It is a comedy which has a low, callow humor. It is the humor of, mockery. It can be the humor of mockery. Yes. I would request somebody to switch off their mic, please. Yes, so it's a low callow humor, which, it's a humor which is very ironic and very difficult to understand, which surfaces in Pinter's plays. And they were called comedies of menace because menace also has a very important role in Pinter's plays. How does menace take place? And now we come to the question if menace at all is there in other playwrights of the theatre of the absurd. There is menace everywhere in mostly all of the plays of the theatre of the absurd because there's very strong and violent links with the aspect of cruelty, the aspect of, yes, and of course, the theatre of the absurd plays. Even before reading theatre of the absurd plays, I would like you to read the Theatre of Cruelty by Antonin Artaud. And Antonin Artaud had talked about how theatre of cruelty works, and this is very functional when we talk about the theatre of the absurd as well. You see, menace is not something that is only violence. It is not only external violence, it is violence which can be external, which can suddenly come upon you from outside in the form of a stranger, a milkman, a doorbell, somebody ringing a doorbell, in the form of a parcel. In the form of a parcel, in the sense that you get a parcel from outside, and as soon as you uncover the parcel, you will see that it's a threat to your life, or there is something which makes you come to know of a motive or something that happened long ago, and that becomes a menace in your life, in your physical and in your mental states of existence. So menace is not always violence in the traditional sense that we understand violence. It can be psychological violence, it can be mental violence, it can be a violence that is very much physical, like in the first play, The Room, where the old man Riley, who has come from outside, is actually bullied and he's beaten up very badly by Rose's husband. And how, you see, Rose herself can, in the end, she says, I can't see, I can't see. She says, actually, she means she's become blind. Now, students have to be very receptive to the fine shades of emotion. She hasn't actually become blind. And it's not that she's not being able to see. What it simply means is that she cannot put up with this violence, which is why she says, I can't see, I can't, which actually means that she cannot tolerate any further. So you see how comedies of menace, they kind of, make a comic situation, a funny situation, a situation which has funny dialogues, absolutely coming together with something that is violent in the form of menace, either from outside or from inside, or from a character who is there with you as your family member, etc. There was another kind of play that Pinter was writing in his mid-career, and these plays were plays where you question the importance of truth or reality, both. I'm not talking about truth and reality as complementary. I'm talking about truth and reality as two different entities, like plays like The Betrayal, and in other plays where you see a particular character cannot go to the bottom of what is happening. If we think of a play like The Basement, we do not know actually what has happened in the past. And Pinter says that the world is absurd. His plays reveal this. What is the element of absurdity then? The element of absurdity is the fact that we cannot know the truth. We cannot know the reality, the exact reality, because the dividing line between reality and the dividing line between unreality or probability in being real is so close. There's so much interlinked that one can suffice for the other. Now, here I would just like to request something to Professor Islam. If you could just remind me just 5 minutes before this class ends so that I can wrap up. I don't want to, end without me completing. So I would be really grateful if you just give me a reminder 5 to 6 minutes before.
Okay, madam. Don't worry. Okay, you carry on. Okay.
Pari! Yes. Am I audible? Hello? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yes. Yes, you are audible, ma'am.
So,
Yes, ma'am.
as I said, there are elements in Pinter which make us actually very suspicious of this fact of reality and unreality. There are elements in Pinter's plays which question what is truth and what is untruth, or is untruth to be is untruth to be held at an arm's length from truth? Is there any validity in doing so? How do we call apart ugly from beautiful and vice versa? All these questions, come very piercingly upon us through Pinter's plays. The middle category of plays of Pinter also talk about political intervention in human lives. We can think of a play like Mountain Language. We can think of a play like The Hothouse, where we are shown how you see the political pressures on individuals have reached an unsurmountable amount, how the state wields violence. It's not always violence with one character with the other. It's not violence about, with one group with the other group. No, sometimes violence is state engineered. Sometimes violence is, manipulated and fully executed by the state. Sometimes terrorism is directly engineered by the state, as in Mountain Language or as in The Hothouse. The Hothouse shows a company which is actually, running on very loose ethical principles, and all the characters, they are bound to follow the norms of that institute, the norms of that organization in a very fruitful way. Otherwise, they will be shot, or they will be sacked, or they will be fired, or even they might lose their lives. Similarly, in Mountain Language, we see how prisoners suffer in police custody. And this is very real, even in our present times. And that's why when Pinter was awarded the Nobel Prize, you see in 2005, there were critics talking about the relevance of his plays to modern times. Yes, they're very relevant. They're very relevant because, in his play, especially in a play like Mountain Language, or, other plays also, we see how prisoners in custody, they are ill-treated, they are raped, they are, even their speech is manipulated, and they are made to say, making their verdict or version in ways which, will actually help the state to get their way across to the other people. So people are treated worse than human beings. And of course, in family dramas, there are quite many plays of Pinter, even if they are screenplays, because you have to remember that Pinter wrote plays for the TV, he wrote plays for the radio, and he even wrote plays for the, the cinema. Cinema plays and TV plays are a bit different, because in cinemas we can have overlapping scenes, and we can have, switch over from one scene to the other, or we can have a double board scene where half of this, screen is divided with something happening in, real time, with the other half of the screen, something happening in the past or something like that. And of course, he had his radio plays, but the greatness of Pinter is that, and we have to say this because he was the one to receive the Nobel Prize, that even in his radio plays, there is this, very, very subtle kind of, expression of that absurdity that has to come to people's lives, about the motivation of human characters, about our efforts falling flat. And very, very importantly, another very useful kind of, another very, subjective kind of plays that Pinter was writing was his memory plays. He was very much influenced by Proust. And he had read Proust, and like Proust's memory plays, there are a few plays, like, as I already mentioned, Moonlight, Silence, Night, and of course the landscape, which kind of shows us what and how memory can become a menace. In the initial part of my lecture, I was talking about menace in the form of a parcel, a group of people, a single person, the doorbell ringing, the milkman, or whoever. But now we see that memory itself in the later half, in the quite later part of Pinter's career, he was writing this memory plays, and there was a series of poems called The War, which he wrote even later. And they are, I must say, reflections of the memory plays where he was a very political, man, and he had intervened in many policies of the U.S. and he had written long letters to the British Prime Minister, and even he had written letters to, many ambassadors of the U.S. because he believed that the U.S. and the U.K. were actually dominating the world politics, and he was against any kind of human suppression, any kind of sabotage done for the sake of caste and religion. Because he belonged to the Jewish community, there might have been that streak of that streak of being, killed or being suppressed right from childhood, and that might have been one of the factors. But even when we go back to the memory plays, we see how memory can actually be a menace. There are characters who go back in their consciousness, they dig out the consciousness from the root of their memory, and when they exchange these words, like a very pertinent play in this direction is The Landscape, where we have a husband and wife. And there are memories of the wife who remembers the husband in very violent ways, through the manner of rape, through the manner of being tortured, who remembers the landlord, Mr. Sykes, in a very positive way. And the husband, he does not recollect the rape that he had committed on his wife long back. He rather remembers the physical gratification that he had from her. So, there is this sense of difference in how people associate with their own actions and how somebody else or the partner with him associates that same action. And because this is a memory play, and because this is a play that talks about memory as the central driving force of human lives, it is also the past that is impinging on the present, and how the present can lead to the future, and how the past, present, and future at one point, they're standing on the same line. There's no differentiation. The edges are very much blurred, and they have the propensity to wreak havoc on your present. The past does have, and the present does have the capacity to totally unnerve and destroy your future. So menace in varied forms, menace in forms that are unprecedented, had been one of the most important preoccupations of Pinter's plays, and from early on. And how even, in his letters, he had been very outspoken. Those letters are realistic pieces. I would just like to conclude, because I'm keeping a watch on the time and I don't have much to say. I would just request the students and those who are interested in Pinter to give his plays a reading, and if possible, the best thing would be to see a staging of his play. Never mind if it's an adaptation, but though it would be better if one sees the original play. And I would like just to say a few concluding remarks, and then I would leave the house for questions if there are any. So what is important in a theater of the absurd play is not the message. I repeat, what is important in the theater of the absurd play is not the message. It is not the failure of human lives again. It is not how successful characters have been. It is not also who have died or who have lost their lives. What is important is something very insignificant. And this insignificant thing, for example, occupies center stage. Say, for example, if I cannot distinguish real from the unreal, then the very fact that I can't distinguish it is something which is important, rather than what was real and what was unreal. I'll just end my lecture with one of the most important, this is not by Pinter though, this is by Ionesco, the chairs. And when we come to the chairs, we will see that an old man delivers a series of impromptu, incomprehensible lectures, which are not words, which are sounds like ah, bah, blah, blah. You see, these are sounds which are incoherent, baby-like musings and sounds, syllables which have no words, to a couple of empty chairs. And it's not because the play is totally absurd. The play does not maybe have a message, but there is a message in the absence of any message. And what is that message? The very important thing is, in a theater of the absurd is, as I said when I began, as to what Albert Camus said about Sisyphus, that perhaps Sisyphus liked doing what he did. And so perhaps the most important thing in the theater of the absurd universe, I'm using this word universe because if we take all the plays by all the writers in a comprehensive mode, then, keeping apart their singular, peculiar differences, their dramatic influences, and keeping apart their, peculiar predilections, we can just conclude that in a theater of the absurd, what is important is the dignity that a human being holds on to in the face of meaninglessness, the dignity the strength that a human being holds on to in spite of, an effortless or rewardless universe where his actions will be brought to naught. How he copes up with simply living. So, living itself is heroic. You don't need to be a hero to be heroic. The aspect of living itself is heroic. It is coping with life that is important. And that is the only message that we get through the theater of the absurd, because the theater of the absurd plays were nihilistic. They were, you know, they had less words, they had less, actions, they had less dialogues, they had less stage decor. So they were, very minimalistic kind of plays. But Pinter isn't that. Pinter is a realistic. There is a realistic writer. He has, his sets may not be so elaborate, but of course they do border on natural settings. And his dialogues are also there. But how this absurdity in a new genre, in a new realistic setting, comes across. That is very important. And that is why I also used another phrase that Pinter uses realism to refute it. So his place settings and his dialogues may be realistic. The situations may be realistic, but realism is refuted in the very meaning, in the very, nuances of the play's message. Now, I would like to invite questions because I see it is 2:56 and I guess there isn't much time left. So yes, if there are any questions.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your wonderful, illuminating, entertaining, and engaging lecture on Harold Pinter and the theater of the absurd. So now it's time for students to ask questions. If there is any doubt or any query, the house is open for questioning. Okay, please, if you have any query, then you can ask. Ma'am is ready to answer your question to clarify your doubt, any kind, if you do have any. Thank you.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, I can.
Hello. What is the existentialism, ma'am?
See, existentialism is a movement which actually helps us to understand the theater of the absurd in a better light. It is a movement of how human beings are thrust into existence, not because they know anything about it, but it considers birth to be accidental, just as it considers death to be accidental. And existence, the very theory of existence as something fruitful is negated. So, existence, because birth and death both are accidental, so the interim period of your lifespan will not have anything that is ennobling, will not have anything that gives you a purpose or meaning to live. And if it does give you a purpose or meaning to live, that may be a futile attempt or a misnomer or something that comes out at the end to be not fulfilling its promise. Now, there were practitioners of the theater of the absurd who believed that existence is a mere accident. Existence is in the post-World War phase, something that is, regressive towards human growth. And this regressiveness is something which is an important aspect of existentialism. To be on the very basics of existential philosophy. Yes.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Any other question? Anybody else would like to ask questions or clarify any doubt? Please, if you have any questions, you can ask. Ma'am, I think nobody has any query. Perhaps your lecture is such illuminating that everything has been clarified. Perhaps.
Actually, it, but yes, of course, theater of the absurd has many more. It has various dimensions from the point of view of different writers, and that way, that would have been more comprehensive. I could have talked about others, but nevertheless, thank you so much for this opportunity. And
Okay, madam, I do have one question, please. I do have one question for us. Now, no, so not all the existentialist philosophers come under this theater of the absurd. So please, can you differentiate between the philosophy or the principles followed by all the writers of the theater of the absurd and the existentialists, please?
I would suggest that that would be a too long question, but yes, I can answer one part of your question. That is, see, the existential philosophy had, philosophers who were not writers. They were writing extracts, they were writing essays, and they were also trying to expose, this existentialism from the viewpoint of science, from the viewpoint of architecture, from the viewpoint of, magnetic science. So, you see, existentialism does not always deal with human existence. Existentialism deals with the life of the universe and also the bodies that surround us. I mean, the intercellular bodies, for example. We can think about the space. We can think about how old the sun is. So that is a different scientific interpretation of existentialism, which the then writers and scientists were exploring. They were not necessarily writers of the theater of the absurd, but when we do come to the theater of the absurd writers, there are writings by Samuel Beckett which are minimalistic. They are very hopeless. They have a central, structure, but which is very circular in nature. Beckett has very few dialogues. The play which everybody knows is Waiting for Godot. But apart from Waiting for Godot, there are many more interesting plays by, Beckett. Say, for example, Craps's Last Tape. And there is a play which I just at the moment I cannot recollect, about an old woman, Maggie Rooney, who is a serial killer who goes on killing children because she has lost her own child. So she takes the morning train to the station every day and kills a kid every day. So there are plays which border on violence and psychological lapses, but they've all been done very suggestively. If you think of Ionesco's The Bald Prima Donna, so these are plays, and I mentioned one of them, The Chairs. You see, all these plays, they kind of have that converging, philosophy of absurdity. That is the only point of consonance between those writers as to how an universe can be absurd. But the ways of approaching that absurdity is different, and so different surfaces in the writings. When we think of Ionesco again, you can think of Kafka, for example. He was some plays of Kafka. For example, the Metamorphosis, if we see how a person can get transformed into a giant bug on the second day, and how his family suppresses him, how he's about to be killed, and how that giant bug suddenly becomes a bug. Have we ever seen that we have transformed into a tiger or a rat or a cat? So you see, this is also an absurd play, but the absurd imagery is there. Not necessary that there has to be an absurd imagery everywhere. We don't have an absurd imagery in Pinter, for example. We don't have an absurd imagery in Samuel Beckett, for example. Yes, of course, in Ionesco, there is in places, very few places. So you see how absurdity as a medium enters and kind of vacillates between different forms, language types, images, thematic resonances before it actually get transformed into what we would call a theater of the absurd play. So each of these writers were using existential modes to define life. I think that is what you meant, because existential modes of perception to understand how life could be. And herein, there is a deep-rooted connection between existentialism and what the proponents of the theater of the absurd were trying to do. You see, this is where existence in various forms, if you see Beckett's Happy Days, if you see other plays by Beckett, there is once again absurdity, but not absurdity which is totally offbeat or something like getting transformed into a bug. So, yes, there is convergence between existential philosophy, but not all existential philosophy deals with human beings. Existential philosophy also deals we can also say there was a very recent something that came up in the 90s, that people were trying to apply existential philosophy, the philosophy of existence, to, space fiction. How does space fiction running side by side with human existence can actually give us an edge? So, existential philosophy at the time when the theater of the absurd emerged was not so very well developed, though it stopped after a decade. But the theory of existence in modern times, if you are a theory person, if you would love to read theory, then we have so many theories on the neo-human, the human as a small atom in the whole space of the world. So we can think about Giles Deleuze, and we can think about Felix Guattari, and we can see how existence itself is like their theories of the rhizome and their theories of dots, how we are linked up. I think that's very relevant, and we can always go back and forth, and though this would be a very vast area to cover up, but existential philosophy in that point of time when the theater of the absurd was there dealt with human beings and their perception of the universe in the post-World War period, just from the viewpoint of literature, not coming to other anthropological, psychological and philosophical sources, but that was also nevertheless there, if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. There is another question in the chat box. The question is from Subhadip Jana. The question is that is there any relation between existentialism and collective unconscious?
Is a term which is a term from psychoanalysis, and collective unconscious has its root in race studies. It has its root in studies related to ethnicity, and in studies related to race and ethnicity. Why I'm saying is this, because the moment you say collective, the moment we use that word collective, it means of a particular racial memory or racial feature of that particular genetic strain that gives you that, sense of continuity. For example, I'll give you a very simple example. Say, for example, I might be a tribal. My tribal lineage might be very old, but I might be the only tribal from that race. We don't find any other tribal. So if I go back to my race, if this is just an example, then I would not find anybody. But then there is, whether it can be collective consciousness, or it can be collective unconsciousness, in the sense that if that collective mode of expression is not expressed, even then, if that collective mode of expression is not expressed, even then, there. Can you hear me? Am I audible? Yes?
Yes, you are audible.
Even if that collective mode of expression is not expressed, you see, that would be collective unconscious. If it is expressed because people are there would be a perpetuation, a continuity of that collective strain. So I don't think it is much to do. It's a term from psychoanalysis, collective unconsciousness, and this is different from existentialism. Of course, you can link it up with factors that might, cross boundaries, but otherwise, I think collective unconscious is something which is totally different from what we might call as, existential.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Is there any other question? Hello? Is, is there any other question?
I can see a question, but can you please read it out to me, Professor Islam? That would be really great. There was a question which somebody typed, and I can't see it because it's flashed out of the screen.
Okay. The question is from Devatosh Rai. Okay, he's a PG student. He said that UNESCO he himself wrote, as the world is incomprehensible to me, I am waiting for someone to explain it. By this, can we dictate that UNESCO himself could not provide enough information about the absurd play?
You see, the very fact of somebody is well this because you see there was the loss of faith, there was the loss of belief in traditional structures, there was the entire Renaissance and the entire idea of Christianity as ennobling forces behind man's existence, and man himself as an architect of his own fate. The point of volition, the point of effort, human endeavor is nullified totally in theater of the absurd. So that is why, Ionesco or Adamov might make this statement that they're waiting for somebody to explain it. The point is, it's not the element of waiting. It is waiting with a confirmation that nobody is going to explain it because there's nothing to be explained. So that is the entire story behind it. So the main factor is that nothing would be explained because there doesn't exist, anything doesn't exist. There are no superstructures on which we can build up faith, on which we can rest our assurances. So that is what it means, because you see, when I said that theater of the absurd plays were anti-plays, these anti-plays, and I said it once again when I ended my speech, that in any theater of the absurd play, the point is not the message and not even what events occur. The point is, and I concluded my saying that the point in any theater of the absurd play is how human beings are able to cope up, or they are not able to cope up with the situation they are offered without any choice of theirs, because the element of human volition is not there. If human volition and human effort does not take you anywhere, then you have no point of choice. Okay? It's like you are placed in a situation where you have nothing to do, and it cannot be controlled by you. It cannot be manipulated by you on the basis of your own physical or mental endeavor or efforts. So that is why there is also no chance that somebody else, a third person, comes and explains or gives you a better assurance about the situation. That is exactly what it means.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So, I think it's a overall illuminating and very wonderful lecture, and we have been uh, informed of so many new things as well, which were now completely unknown before. Now, we have already reached the concluding point of our session. Now, I do now request Ms. Kakuli Lai to propose a vote of thanks. Ms. Kakuli Lai, please.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. You are audible.
Okay, sir. So, good afternoon to all present here. It's really an honor for me to convey a vote of thanks to all of them who have made this special lecture a successful one with their gracious presence. First and foremost, I would like to thank our respected principal, Dr. Pankaj Kumar Debnath, sir, on behalf of the whole Department of English of Cooch College, for enlightening us with his presence as well as valuable and encouraging speech. I would also like to convey our special gratitude to our special speaker, Dr. Isha Madam, Assistant Professor of Rabindra Bharati University, Kolkata, for offering such an opportunity to illuminate us with her great, insightful lecture and obviously sharing her precious moments with us today. It was really a pleasure to listen to you, ma'am, and the very way you have presented Pinter as well as the theater of the absurd to us. This will surely enrich the students to have a great insight into the mentioned topic, I think. So now I would also like to convey my special thanks to our head of the department, Mohammad Tariqul Islam sir, and our respected coordinator, Mr. Pallab Kumar Sarker sir, for such great endeavors to assist the department with the best. Then I would also like to thank all the faculty members, the students, as well as all the participants for their great constant cooperation to make this a successful one and obviously on such a great level. So once again, thank you all for being here so long and wish you a great day ahead. Thank you. To you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kakule Life, the invited faculty members in our PG department. Okay, now one request madam, to you, that you may please write your mail in the chat box, so the students, if you have any query, okay, at later date or at any point of time, they may reach you. Please, if you don't mind, you can leave in the chat box your email ID, please.
Okay, I'll give it to you, Professor Islam. I think you can.
Okay, okay. Thank you, ma'am. Again, okay, I will share it in the groups. Okay. So thank you all of you. Okay, for
Thank you,
giving
sir.
us a very pleasant hearing. Okay, thank you. We'll leave now.
Thank you, sir and ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.